Today I'm joined by Liz Malthouse, Principal of Beachside Property Rentals in the beautiful Sunshine Coast in Australia. Liz, welcome to the show.
Hi Wayne, how are you this week?
I'm really well, thank you. Now Liz, you're a mobile property manager. Why mobile?
Well, we decided that we wanted to be accessible to our clients, and you don't really need an office for that in today's technology in the noughties. An office is the old way that I think people do real estate, especially in property management. Property managers are always in their car, or they're in their office, or they're at a property. So it's trying to give that intimate relationship between our owner and our tenant, and trying to connect with them more. A good example of that is even this morning, today we had a tenant moving into a property. So instead of them meeting you at an office somewhere, which is quite cold and they're all quite disjointed because they're trying to get into the property, I actually meet them at the property. Sit down, hand over the keys, do a little walkthrough of the property, make sure that they're comfortable with everything, they know how to use everything. So it's more about trying to do something different than the typical mainstream property managers do. So mobile, why not?
Now this idea of doing something different, you don't do the listing and selling and auctioning of properties either, do you?
No. So purely property management. That's my focus. That's my passion. That's my craft. So instead of doing that, although I am fully licensed and I have got the same license as a sales consultant or a principal who owns a sales office, it's just that I choose to purely focus on property management.
I guess that allows you to be a trusted advisor to both property owners and landlords and tenants much more easily.
Absolutely, because if someone's looking at buying an investment property, I'm very neutral, and I don't get involved in the sales side of things, although I have a few agents that I work with that do sales, so to give them added value to the properties that they're selling. But it's a neutral, it's an independent valuation, I suppose, and working with tenants and owners, that's my passion. So I am neutral. The role of a property manager is a mediator or a communicator between the owner and the tenant. So my role is to be neutral. I'm governed by legislation, and I have to at times make an owner aware of the legislation where it fits in today's society or with an issue. Or then again, I have to talk to a tenant about an issue that they may have raised that is not legislated, and it's something that it's not the owner's responsibility to do. So I'm like a sieve between an owner and a tenant.
Now, Liz, in that role, one of the things that always seems to attract attention and make the news headlines is maintenance. What are your thoughts on maintenance for both tenants and owners?
Maintenance, it's an interesting one. So when I first have a look at a property and I meet an owner at a property before it comes on my books, we have a chat, we have a walkthrough, we have a chat to the owner and let them know that their responsibilities in having a property and what their obligations are to a tenant. Now, don't forget, a tenant is actually paying a weekly rent in order to have the brick and mortar that they call their home. In that process, for instance, if a light globe blows, or then there was a light globe in a light fitting at that point in time, it's a tenant's responsibility because they've utilised that globe to replace it. If a hot water service blows, unfortunately, that's part of the owner's obligation, and they must actually replace that hot water service, whether it be we require a plumber to get a new service, or it might just be we need an electrician because the thermostat may have gone. So it's really important to not be afraid to have the discussion with our owners, so that they're abreast of what their actually obligations are. And different things do pop up from time to time. Things like obligations that they can't get away from is smoke alarms. Now, smoke alarms is extremely important. Who, as an owner, could imagine if a home catches fire and burns down and that's your property and your tenants and someone dies? I couldn't even think of anything worse. I'm quite fanatical of this. But then there's a lot of people out there who self-manage, or they just think that there's a smoke alarm in the system, in the ceiling, that it's actually compliant. Unfortunately, it may not be the case. I've just put some other properties in the property that they've gone in today. We had the smoke alarms checked by a professional smoke alarm company. And I don't think a lot of people realise that smoke alarms do expire. And therefore that will affect your policy, your insurance policy. So if a property did burn down because of that, then it will null and void your policy. So it's really important to have a property manager who is comfortable to talk to you as an owner of the obligations and why you go for professionals to look after. An example is a smoke alarm. Another example would be pool compliance. In Queensland, it's quite big with pool compliance. Pools have to be tested in a residential home every 2 years, and they must receive another certificate, so they have to be continually checked. With a body corporate complex, it's only 12 months. They have to be recertified every 12 months. We've had a few drownings on the Sunshine Coast. People, when I do my routine inspections, some tenants leave the gates open, so they allow their dogs or their kids go in and out. That's highly illegal. And I crank down on it straight away, because who could imagine, again, who wants to see a drowning in their rental property? You know, these rules that are legislated, government legislated, have been put in place for a reason, and you know they're really important, really important.
You raise a really interesting aspect there, Liz, with insurance, and I know with motor cars, if you're under the influence of alcohol and driving, your insurance may not cover you. Does it extend beyond fire alarms and swimming pools? I guess there are lots of things that occur to me that could make a landlord liable, and maybe the insurers like to avoid having to pay if it's the wrong sort of glass or if it's a defect of some sort. Absolutely,
and I think insurance companies will get out of anything that they could actually possibly get out of. I'm not qualified to give advice to an owner. I can only look at a property and visually see. Like, I can't see what's inside the wall cavities. So I think owners have a responsibility to ensure, like for electricity, that they know that it's sound. If it's an old style property, make sure that they feel comfortable on renting it out. Another big issue in Queensland over the years has been timber decks. Now, Queensland people love living in the outdoors. That's probably why it's more predominant. We have a lot of timber decks, so every time I do my routine inspections, I've got a timber deck out here. I'm always put my hand on the rail and manoeuvre it to see that it's secure. Because again, you don't want that happening. You look at the bearers. Obviously, I can't get under. It's not my job to get under ground level, rolling in the dirt, have a look under the deck. But if a deck is raised, have a look at the bearers and the joists to see if they're sound. Make sure that the timber panels that are there are not rotting, because we have some horrendous winter rains or storms up here. And if there's decks that are exposed to the elements, the boards can perish and people can fall through a deck. So, you know, that can affect their insurance, but that's all part of owning a property. If it was your own property, you know, you always have to add maintenance to a property and always keep working at it to, you know, keep it at its optimal value, I suppose. And by having a good property that is presented nicely, you as an owner, of course, are going to be rewarded with a higher dollar value rent on your investment property.
It does sound like you need not just a nice property, but a property manager who's willing to bring you bad news when there is bad news and who's competent to know the difference between what has to be dealt with and what would be nice to deal with.
Oh, absolutely. And this property that I had tenants move in this morning, the owner has actually relocated and they've actually moved into a rental property. And it's interesting that he's given me a call and saying, Liz, you know, this has happened and this has happened. They've moved into a property that has not been cleaned. Now that's probably very disrespectful to them as a tenant. So they haven't really set off on the right foot. Now there might be many reasons why that wasn't cleaned. It's irrelevant to the tenant. You know, you have to respect them. So therefore, if you're not setting off on the right foot, or that property manager obviously didn't feel courageous enough or didn't know legislation enough to be able to have that conversation with that owner to say, unfortunately, there's a lot of things in that property that don't meet our standards. And maybe standards is an issue. Like, I have really high standards that I believe a tenant should be respected, and I believe all my owners believe our tenants should be respected and they should be given the value and the respect of being able to move into a nice clean property, because I can guarantee you when I get that back, it needs to be cleaned and it needs to be at the same standard as they received it. Maintenance, you know, again, it's if I get a property or when I do my routine inspections, when I'm walking around a property, if I think, well, the paintwork's looking a bit thin, I'm not expecting an owner to, you know, employ a contractor immediately to paint it. But let's have that conversation with the owner so that they're pre-arranging or budgeting for maybe in the next transition of a tenant that they have some money kept away so that we can repaint, or the guttering is rusting and therefore it's pooling water down on the ground. You know, it's all those little bits and pieces, and it's all the little 1%ers that property managers, I find that I do better to give that to the information to the owners so that we have a conversation. It's not conflict. It's all conversations to work towards when is the best time that we're going to do that. Okay, we have an issue here. Let's work towards getting it done. But then there's some maintenance that you just can't put off, and it's a tenant's right to have a maintenance-free property. That's under the legislation. The owners really need to ensure that their properties are at a certain standard. You can't just say, I'm sorry, I can't afford that hot water service. What happens if the tenants say, I'm sorry, I can't afford this week's rent?
Yes.
You know, it's give and take between both parties.
Now, Liz, there'll be property owners around who are looking for a good property manager. What are the suburbs that you work in?
Okay, I work in Noosa Heads, Tewantin, Noosaville, Peregian Springs, Peregian Beach, Mount Coolum, Coolum Beach and Yaroomba, and also as out in the Hinterland, Cooroy and Black Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
All those lying areas.
None of those sound like awful places to live, I just have to say, listening to you read them all.
Oh, it's tough living on the Sunshine Coast.
It is apparently. It's so hard, and I'm just looking at behind you at that lovely sunshine there in the middle of winter and thinking, oh, Liz Malthouse lives a tough life, I tell you.
Well, it has been quite cold lately, but our days are nice and our nights are getting a little bit warmer. So bring on summer.
Liz, it's been lovely having a chat with you again. Liz Malthouse is the principal of Beachside Property Rentals, and you can find her on the internet at beachsidepr.com.au. Thanks for giving us some time today, Liz.
Thanks, Wayne. Have a great day.